In the summer of 1692, one of the richest cities on Earth vanished in less than 2 minutes, swallowed whole by the sea. This is the true story of Port Royal, Jamaica. The port so lawless and so wealthy that people called it the wickedest city in the world. Built on a narrow strip of sand at the entrance to Kingston Harbour, this tiny island became the beating heart of the entire Caribbean. By the late 1600s, Port Royal was drowning in gold, silver, rum and treasure stolen from 100 different Spanish galleons. Pirates didn't just visit this city, they ruled its streets. Some called them criminals, others called them kings of the sea. Legendary captains like Henry Morgan sailed home to Port Royal and turned their looted Spanish gold into fortunes overnight. For every honest ship that sailed into the harbor, 100 sinners, smugglers and outlaws followed close behind them. Taverns outnumbered ordinary homes. Brothels outnumbered churches. In Port Royal, sin wasn't hidden. It was the city's main export. Historians would later give the city a chilling nickname that stuck forever: the Sodom of the New World. Merchants grew fabulously wealthy, selling pirates exactly what no honest, respectable port anywhere else in the world ever would. Slave traders, smugglers, and privateers of every nation all called this small, sun-scorched island their one safe harbor. By the year 1690, Port Royal held more wealth per person crammed into it than the entire city of London. But beneath its packed, noisy streets, the very ground itself was hiding a deadly, unimaginable secret from everyone above. The entire city had been built on loose, unstable sand. Not solid rock, not bedrock, just soft, shifting earth. No one in Port Royal knew it yet, but their glittering city was standing directly on top of a ticking time bomb. June 7th, 1692. A hot, humid, seemingly ordinary morning in the world's richest and most sinful pirate city. Merchants quietly opened their stalls for business. Sailors nursed their hangovers from the night before. Church bells rang out as always. At exactly 11:43 in the morning, without a single warning, the ground beneath the entire city began to shake violently. Within seconds, the loose, waterlogged sand beneath Port Royal turned instantly into something closer to liquid than solid earth. Buildings didn't simply topple over. They were pulled downward and swallowed whole, sinking straight into the collapsing ground. Streets cracked wide open like fresh wounds, pulling terrified people down into the earth while they were still alive. One horrified survivor later described the earth opening beneath his feet, swallowing him, then closing shut over his head. Ships anchored peacefully in the harbor just moments earlier were violently lifted and hurled straight into the collapsing city streets. A massive, sudden wave rose up out of the bay and came crashing directly through the heart of the dying city. In under 2 full minutes, nearly 2/3 of Port Royal had completely disappeared, swallowed beneath the dark Caribbean Sea. Close to 2,000 people died in the initial quake alone, a huge portion of the entire city gone in mere seconds. Thousands more would go on to die slowly from disease, infection, and injury in the horrific days that followed. Terrified survivors swore the ocean itself had reached out with a single motion and dragged their whole city under. Preachers up and down the Caribbean immediately declared the disaster instant, righteous punishment for a city built entirely on sin. To many people at the time, this was undeniable proof. God himself had personally judged the wickedest city on earth. But modern science tells a very different story, one that is, in its own way, just as terrifying to imagine. Port Royal had been built directly on top of unstable coastal sediment, prone to a violent process scientists call liquefaction. When shaken hard enough by an earthquake, solid-looking ground can suddenly begin behaving almost exactly like a thick liquid. In truth, the entire glittering city had been a disaster, centuries in the making, simply waiting for its moment to strike. What little remained of Port Royal after the earthquake was left a broken, half-drowned, barely recognizable shadow of a ruin. Desperate survivors tried again and again to rebuild their city, but devastating fires and hurricanes kept striking it down. Within just a few decades, the once great pirate capital of the world had faded into little more than a small fishing town. The city that had once terrified entire empires slowly became nothing more than a forgotten footnote in the history books. And yet, Port Royal never truly disappeared for good. It simply sank quietly out of human sight, beneath the waves. Down beneath the surface of the water, an entire 17th century city lay perfectly preserved, frozen in a single moment of time. It wasn't until the 1960s that archaeologists finally began diving down into the dark, silent, sunken ruins of Port Royal. What these divers found stunned the entire scientific world. Full streets, ordinary homes, and busy shops frozen exactly in place. Among the ruins, divers discovered a small pocket watch, stopped forever at the exact moment the disaster first struck. Its tiny hands were frozen at precisely 11:43, the exact second the entire city began falling into the sea. Divers found dinner tables still fully set, wine bottles still tightly corked. Ordinary lives paused right in the middle of motion. Port Royal became one of the only true underwater time capsules of its kind found anywhere on Earth. Today, archaeologists and historians often refer to the sunken city simply as the Pompeii of the Caribbean. But unlike Pompeii, this city wasn't slowly buried under ash. It was violently swallowed whole by the open sea. Thousands of artifacts have since been carefully recovered from the ruins. Coins, weapons, jewelry, and everyday household tools. Each single object tells its own small piece of the story of a city that lived fast and vanished even faster. Some researchers still believe the underwater ruins may hold pirate treasure that was never fully claimed or recovered. Others believe that the remains of the dead still quietly lie, buried somewhere beneath the shifting Caribbean sand. Local legend insists that on the quietest nights, you can still faintly hear church bells ringing somewhere underwater. Whether it's myth, memory, or something else entirely, the story of Port Royal simply refuses to stay buried forever. Port Royal once stood proudly for wealth without limits and power that seemed to come with absolutely no consequences. In under 2 minutes, the sea violently reminded an entire empire that nothing built by human hands is truly permanent. The wickedest, richest city on Earth ultimately became one of history's greatest and most dramatic warnings ever recorded. Today, curious tourists dive peacefully above its ruins, swimming quietly through streets that have been frozen since 1692. A city that was once built entirely on gold and greed now rests silently beneath the calm Caribbean waves. And somewhere far below, deep in the dark water, Port Royal's old clocks are still stuck forever at 11:43.